Meeting of Thursday, May 28th, 2020 to order. And before we get started, I would like to remind everyone that's on the phone to please mute your microphones so that we don't have any background noise. Thank you. At this time, Sandy, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Shippers?
Here.
Ellenboss?
Present.
Ingalls?
Here.
King?
Here.
Mayor Folkins?
Here. And if everyone had an opportunity to peruse the agenda, could we get a motion to approve that agenda?
This is Councilmember King. I would make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Councilmember Ellenboss?
Yes.
Ingalls?
Yes.
King?
Yes.
Shippers?
Yes.
Mayor Folkins?
Yes, motion carries. At this time, we'll open the floor for public comments. We do ask if you would like to make a comment that you state your name and address for the clerk and keep your time to 3 minutes or less. Thank you. Hearing no one, we'll close public comment and move to the approval of the consent agenda from the regular meeting that was held on May 18th, 2020.
This is Councilmember Shippers, and I will make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Councilmember King supports.
Councilmember Ingalls?
Yes.
King?
Yes.
Shippers?
Yes.
Ellenboss?
Yes.
Mayor Folkins?
Yes, motion carries. And the reason for our presence here this evening is that we are holding a public hearing. And Marcus, if you would like to go ahead and introduce that.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. This evening, we're here to have a public hearing to consider the adoption of an ordinance establishing our General Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2021. As a part of that presentation, staff has prepared a couple of primary documents that we're gonna run through. The first one are a set of questions and answers and clarifications regarding the downtown public infrastructure project located adjacent to Cadillac Lofts. And then as a part of that, we also have for presentation the city's COVID-19 pandemic financial response plan, all of that then leading into the actual Appropriations Act ordinance that we're requesting your consideration this evening to adopt. So the project is the public infrastructure improvements located in downtown Cadillac off of Mitchell, Cass, Chapin, and Shelby Streets, generally surrounding the Cadillac Lofts development. New public sidewalks, public parking, and public roads constitute the main components of this public infrastructure related improvements. Just for reference sake, MCC is the acronym that stands for Michigan Community Capital. They're the developer for the project. MEDC is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grant, which is a federal grant program facilitated by the MEDC, which is a state agency. And the development is Cadillac Lofts. And combined with the city, that forms, essentially our P3, or a public-private partnership. I'm going to run through these questions and answers, which, by the way, they are all available along with the COVID-19 pandemic financial response plan on our website. www.cadillac-mi.net. They're in the center carousel feature, so if you don't see it right when you get to the homepage, click either the left or the right arrow, and it'll rotate around and get you right to the link to get you to these documents. So these are very somewhat common questions that have been raised. I'm going to do my best to go through them. One is, has MCC offered to give up their developer fee in exchange for an amendment to the Brownfield plan. MCC is not taking any sort of developer fee. And in addition, the amendment that was passed at your council meeting last week to the Brownfield plan brings no additional dollars to the private development either. Is MCC paying, or excuse me, is the city paying MCC their profits through tax dollars? Nope, is the answer to that. Most commercial residential development projects are only able to get financing for 12 to 15 years from the big banks. Is what we did last week, does that extend the plan beyond 20 years? Again, the answer is this amendment, or the amendment, adds the reimbursement to improve public infrastructure. Those types of plans are often financed over 20 years or more. So the issue is that it's not unique. How much profit is MCC taking out of the money? The answer is MCC currently projects an annual return of approximately 2%. I do have online, as well as in the packet, their developer return analysis, which I believe actually quotes 1.89% on their return on investment. And to date, they've currently invested approximately $5.2 million of equity into the site. Cadillac has other projects downtown, that are kind of watching us. Would the city look at doing something similar for them? And the answer is yes, of course we would. But it's important to understand that every project is different, every deal is different. The variety of public incentives that are applicable that would make sense for one project may not make sense for another project. And so, the answer is really it depends. Did the city lose a CDBG, and has MCC provided a report of searching out other financing to make up the difference? The very quick answer is simply no. The city did not lose a CDBG. Michigan Community Capital, MCC, has not provided a report regarding any other financing. A little bit more in detail, the city did receive actually a CDBG for this project, totaling nearly $750,000 to get the site prepped. We are in the process of trying to get ourselves eligible to apply for a second CDBG, but we need to be certified before we can do that. And it's certainly unknown whether or not, one, will be certified, and two, whether or not, even if we do get certified, whether or not we'll have success in getting a second one. And the timing as it relates to the public infrastructure improvements, as it correlates to construction and the final construction of Building 1, is such that we need to move forward now versus waiting what could be over a year to see if we have another CDBG grant coming our way. Does the city lose opportunity of getting a new CDBG by doing what we did in terms of the Brownfield Plan Amendment because we're utilizing it as a source of funding? Again, the simple answer to that is no. Has the city prepared a list of capital expenditures that may be put on hold until we determine the extent of the effect of COVID-19 due to reduced taxes, revenue sharing from the state, loss or reductions of other tax revenue on the city? The answer to that is yes. In fact, that's the second part of our presentation tonight. That's our COVID-19 pandemic financial response plan. As we work through that plan, and Owen's going to do that presentation, there is referenced as an addendum to that plan is actually this downtown public infrastructure improvement project. So it all correlates back and forth. Again, there's some questions about whether or not we've prepared a list of possible revenues as well that might see a reduction. All of that is referenced in the financial response plan. What is the effect on the city of borrowing funds to put in the public infrastructure around the loft's development, and the effect of the tax recapture if tax revenues do substantially decrease? Will any projects be sacrificed or taken off of the schedule because of this project? Great question. And the answer is also a good one, too. The answer is nothing will be sacrificed because the borrowing of funds is for public infrastructure that is eligible for repayment from road fund dollars if needed. Conservative budgeting and road funds will enable repayment even if the reimbursement period is extended because of slower value growth. All projects scheduled in the recently approved 6-year capital improvement program remain in the plan in the same year as originally scheduled. Does the city have a current bond outstanding in relation to roads, and if so, how much is still owed? We do, $2.3 million, and debt service for the new issue is built into budget projections. How much equity does each investor have in the loft's development? MCC, or Michigan Community Capital, is the only investor in the project, and they currently have approximately $5.2 million invested as equity. Another really good question, too, and these are all good questions. What specifically are the city's liabilities in relation to the project if it does fail, as, for example, in year 5? The answer is there is no additional liability, and this would be the same as any project that pays taxes to the city. Plus, the MEDC's revitalization program grant to MCC, which I believe was about $1.5 million, and the approval of their Public Act 381 work plan are contingent upon completion of the project. Once completed, there is no liability from the state's perspective regarding asking for any monies back or taking ownership of the property in any way. And as noted above, even in bankruptcy, the asset would likely be purchased at a discount and continue to operate with tax value based on income. So again, there is no additional liability. Is city money going to be spent on the parking lot in Shelby Street? All private parking lots will be funded with private funds. Shelby Street is being deeded to the city and then will be a part of upcoming public infrastructure activities once it's a part of the public, once it's back back as our public asset. We anticipate that to happen later this spring, early summer. The city's costs for making the public infrastructure improvements will all be reimbursed back because the Brownfield plan last week was amended to provide the revenue from MCC through their captured taxes from the development itself. Another good question. It's a long answer. I'm going to try to be concise. Is there anything in writing, as to why we lost or were unable to receive the block grant from the state or any other responsible entity, and were any deadlines missed by the city that resulted in us not being approved for the grant before the COVID-19 pandemic? So first and foremost, the CDBG grant, it was not lost. That's the first thing. Secondly, the MEDC and federal policies changed to provide CDBG infrastructure grants only to certified low and moderate income communities. And as I mentioned before, the city is in the process of trying to get certified in order to be eligible to apply, something that we were not required to have in place when we received the first CDBG source of funds. According to the MEDC, for the majority of CDBG funded projects, applications for future allocations are open on a year-round basis and can be applied for at any time. However, with a recent shift in MEDC administration and funding from the federal government, there was a decision made in the fall of 2019 where infrastructure requests in general would be made on an annual basis through competitive funding rounds available to only those communities who fall financially upon the MEDC's low to moderate income list. Again, the city is not currently on that list, which is why we're not eligible at this time to apply. However, we are in the process of trying to get ourselves back on that list. We were ready to basically come forward, or I shouldn't say at the moment, we were really close to being ready to coming forward to the city council with a request to move ahead with a certified institution of higher learning to actually conduct the survey. Once we got word from them that they would be willing to do it. However, the pandemic occurred and all the institutions closed, so everything just stopped. But again, all the details are in writing, and it's all on our website for people to refer back to. By the way, I should have prefaced everything I'm saying. The answers to these various questions and whatnot that I just read through were all provided in part not just by the city, but through the MEDC, through our Brownfield consultant, and through Michigan Community Capital. Now the following are some additional clarifications that were put together just to try to highlight and put a finer point First one, the city is not loaning, granting, or getting involved in the Cadillac Lofts business, nor is the city in any way a landlord or managing any of their property. The city's pending construction and improvements of city-owned public property that surround the Cadillac Lofts site is financially no different than any other public street, parking, or sidewalk project we may do, but for the important fact that the city will get itself reimbursed for this one. The money to pay for the public infrastructure will be from the same source of funds that the city intends to use to pay for other public street infrastructure, which is from bonds that are being issued for the city's upcoming road projects. This project actually provides outside revenues to help repay that bond. This project is not taking away from any other project because its cost is getting reimbursed, similar to a reimbursable type grant. The money to reimburse the city is coming from the developer through their captured taxes. A tax increment portion of the taxes paid by the developer is captured by the Brownfield Authority. It goes into a special account called the Brownfield Fund that is then used to reimburse the city. Because the city is also getting money from the developer that otherwise would have been paid to the state of Michigan, that too will go to the city as a part of the way that the Brownfield reimbursement works. Another interesting point I'm going to raise before jumping into the next presentation is that if the brownfield didn't exist, if that whole mechanism didn't exist for this specific project, the geographic location of the project itself is within the city's downtown development authority. So that increment of tax that is getting captured, that's used to reimburse for these eligible public infrastructure expenses, would have otherwise not gone to the city in general, but it would have gone to the Downtown Development Authority. Downtown Development Authority is then bound by their financial plan to use those monies on public infrastructure projects for the area that they serve. So those same dollars would have been used, in a sense, to do the same work on the public infrastructure surrounding the loft sites. And the reason why we didn't just simply do it that way is because the Downtown Development Authority doesn't have the ability of capturing the state taxes, whereas the Brownfield Authority does. So the Downtown Authority and the Brownfield Authority agreed that during the time that the plan is in place, that the Brownfield Authority would actually capture those taxes because they're able to capture more, the more being the state taxes that otherwise the state just continues to capture. So it essentially provided a bonus to the system. So that's the reason why the Brownfield Authority in this type of instance was a better tool to use. As I mentioned, the developer's investment returns, which is their return analysis, is also online and is a part of this document. Right now, they're projecting a 1.89% return, just under 2%. Moving into the next document that, again, all of this is correlated together with, is the draft COVID-19 Pandemic Financial Response Plan. City Council, as a part of your meeting last week, when we had the hearing regarding the Appropriations Act ordinance, basically said, look, we did spend a lot of quality time together over the last few months going through the budget process, but we want to pause. We want to make sure that we're not being too hasty and moving things forward, especially given the economic uncertainties. There's a lot of news out there. Every day something else is changing. Every day something else is happening in terms of this pandemic. Different municipalities across the state are all doing something different. Let us pause. Let us just make sure that we're going to be in a good position as we move forward with our new budget. That was how I think staff interpreted council's discussion. And so, in response to that, we put together literally a response plan. The response plan identifies the problem. So, the problem is the COVID-19 pandemic. And what is the problem? Well, it's created significant financial turbulence, that's negatively affected the economies of countries around the globe, and certainly didn't spare the United States or Michigan. Recent, revenue estimates place the loss of revenues, for the state of Michigan's general fund at approximately $2 billion for the current fiscal year. And we know that all this is going to change. It's going to likely go up. We expect additional decreases, over the next couple of fiscal years. The impact to Michigan's economy, is going to inevitably affect us at the local economy, and the revenues that Cadillac receives. How quick, that economy gets built back up again, nobody really knows until it starts to happen. In fact, I just heard during the governor's brief shortly before this meeting, they're looking, at continuing like we are to monitor the situation over time to see how fast the economy starts to rebound. In this time of economic uncertainty, and while at the same time we do need to pass a budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020, this is an effort, to exemplify our ongoing conservative fiscal approach, during this time of unknown impacts to important revenue sources, is how we looked at, is what we looked at when we created this response plan. The plan showcases financial planning diligence by identifying potential projects to temporarily pause until financial indicators are available, such as receipts from future tax allocations and new projections from the state. Looking at the local impact, this report focuses on 4 primary funds for the city: our general fund, our major street fund, our local street fund, and our water and sewer fund. They collectively make up a majority of our overall budget and contain the revenue sources, that we believe will face the most significant and actionable impacts from the pandemic. Within the 4 funds that I just mentioned, the sources of these sources of revenue will be the primary focus of the following analysis that Owen Roberts, our finance director, is going to walk us through. And they include these sources: property taxes, state shared revenue, Act 51 road funds, water and sewer user charges, and interest income. And with that, I am going to pass the torch to Owen and also say thank you very much for putting this plan together. It looks good, I think.
All right, great, thank you. As Marcus said, we just wanted to spend probably the majority of our time on revenue impacts, because that is how we'll see the most impact here locally. The pandemic hasn't had any real marketable impact on expenditures, but the revenue side certainly presents the most challenges. And I know that this is kind of a lengthy report, and you've had it about just over a day. I'm not going to read it, but I do want to just expound on a few of the things to help just provide you the understanding on what we think may be, as we analyze what we're seeing out in the news and in the media and projections from the state level, how that may impact us here locally. So first and foremost for us is property taxes. Property taxes provide about 56% of general fund revenues each year, and I think it's important to note on property taxes that tax day, basically as we refer to it, property tax values are set as of December 31st of each year. So the tax roll that we are finalizing now that will provide revenue for fiscal year 2021 was established as of the value of parcels on December 31st. So that was before any impacts of the pandemic began taking place. So that's good news. That helps stabilize this for sure for this year. Again, point 2 on property taxes is that as of March 1st each year, delinquent balances go to the state or to the county, for collection, and the county pays the city for those delinquent balances, and then they collect them. So essentially that gives us 100% collection each and every year. And then if the property then goes all the way through the tax foreclosure process, then we would have the potential to have to reimburse some of the delinquent taxes after that period of time. But we'll know that as time moves along. But year to year, we get basically 100% collection rate once we hit March 1st of each year. I think additionally, one of the impacts on our property tax base that we've seen from like Proposal A and the Headley Amendment has been that they establish these 2 different values for your parcel, and council knows this well, but just want to go through this briefly. And those are taxable value and assessed value. So Essentially, assessed value represents 50% of your true cash value of your home, but taxable value is the value on which your property taxes are calculated. Taxable value can't ever be more than assessed value, but it can be less. And the taxable value is restricted in growth to inflation. Basically, the CPI set at September 30 of each year, your taxable value cannot grow in excess of that. So in a time of a very hot real estate market with increasing property values, assessed values could be going up at a rate greater than that, but still your taxable value will grow slower. Conversely to that, your assessed value in a time of declining market may drop steeply, but because of that gap, your taxable value would drop slower. This kind of a confusing concept, so I tried to illustrate it for you on the two charts, page 3 of your report. And again, as Marcus said a couple of times, for those that may be on TV or the computer, those reports are on our website. So on chart number 1, the real property value is in the orange line and the taxable value is in the blue line. And you can just see the trend on the orange line is steeper on the way down and steeper on the way up. So that really is a reflection of what actually happens in the market. But the taxable value didn't drop as much and doesn't grow as much, and that's because of the restriction in growth to inflation. So you can these charts started in 2008, which was before the last Great Recession. Keep in mind that the Great Recession was one of the primary contributing factors to that was the housing market. That's not the case this time. So this will probably look a little different as we move forward, but as a point of reference, the assessed value peaked in 2008, then dropped $66.5 million, or 25%, over the next 5 years before recovering today to about the same value that it was in 2008. On the other hand, taxable value peaked in 2009, a year later, then dropped $30 million, or 14%, less than half dollar value that assessed value dropped over the next 5 years, and is still over $8 million less than pre-recession levels. So again, as also illustrated, the chart below is the same numbers, just presented as a percentage, not as in values. You can see the troughs are lower and the peaks are higher when you look at assessed value versus taxable value. So what does all that mean for us? Basically, we have a $54 million gap between assessed value and taxable value as of our 2020 tax roll. So what that means for us is values could begin to drop. We don't know. The statistics right now are still pretty good on the housing market, I think exceeding expectations. But that assessed value could begin to drop. But until it would connect then potentially with taxable value, there is this protection in that gap to protect against what property values are doing and what taxable value could do. So that provides us a level of reassurance that not only are values set December 31 before the pandemic hit, but there's also for the future this protectionary gap that we've built up over the last number of years. So I hope that makes some sense. So to move into how does this impact us for our current budget? Essentially, we're projecting that this won't impact this important revenue source for the fiscal year 2021 budget. Again, as I mentioned, we may have to watch that delinquency. We'll get all the money. We'll monitor the delinquency levels with the county to see if we're going to run into any issues. But for this year, that won't cause us a loss of revenue for the fiscal year 2021 budget. Moving to page 4 of the report, this details state shared revenue. This is the second most significant revenue source for the general fund. To remind you, there's two components of state shared revenue. One is a constitutional component, so this one is not subject to state appropriation each and every year in the state's budget. This is actually the constitutional formula The gas taxes and the vehicle registration fees essentially flow into a pool each year, and those monies are shared by the constitutional formula back to the local levels, and so, or local municipalities. The other portion is subject to state appropriation. That's the state's city, village, township revenue sharing program. This is based on an annual appropriation in the state budget. The constitutional portion is a lot bigger. In fact, it's about 80%. The statutory portion is about 20%. So we had budgeted $915,000 for the constitutional portion and $205,000 from the statutory portion, for a total of $1,120,000 of revenue that we had anticipated for fiscal year 21. Initially, this was $26,000 below what the state had projected. Again, this is just a conservative budgeting approach. Again, just a reminder, this also is a revenue source that has fallen woefully short of what we should have gotten over the last couple of decades. So how will this impact us for this budget? Well, this one will impact us. So initially, the state, again, had projected higher. They had their revenue estimating conference on May 15th, and we watched that with great interest to see how that would impact the city of Cadillac. What it means for us is they are now projecting revenues of just over $1,005,969 compared to our initial proposed budget of $1,120,000. So this results in a decrease of anticipated funds of $114,000. Again, just as a reminder, the CVTRS portion is subject to appropriation. The state is about to have to also adopt a budget, so it remains to be seen what they would do. Just as an example, if they were to enact a 10% cut to that revenue source, that would be a $20,000 reduction to the city. So $20,000 is real money, but this isn't one where if they did that, it would cause us to kind of be in an emergency position. So we will watch that closely as the state moves through their budgeting process. Moving on to our road funds. If you will remember back in 2015, or I believe they enacted it, started in 2017, the state had passed the legislation to increase the gas taxes from 19 cents per gallon to 26.3 cents per gallon. And there was also an increase in vehicle registration fees. This caused revenue projections to go up, basically. And I always get nervous about budgeting for promised state increases. And so we've done that very, very conservatively over the last couple of years. In addition, the state also updated their estimates and projections on April 29th. Of 2020, so this was after the major impacts of the pandemic were in full force, and so we were very very interested and in tune with those reprojections as well. So here's the bottom line for our impact, and this is the money for the major and local street funds. So we had originally budgeted, or the state had originally projected revenue of $1,441,775. We had budgeted just $1.37 million, just as a conservative estimate, as revenues increase after the gas taxes went up. The newest projections now estimate, and again these were released on April 29th, that we will receive $1,372,679 in revenues. So that's nearly identical to where our budget is for fiscal year 2021. So because of that, again, we don't see, in as far as the projections in their current iteration, I guess you would say, we don't see a major impact on next year's budget. And again, looking at the 5-year projections that I update as part of the budget process, they've gone out for the state's fiscal year 21 and 22, and both of our projections in our 5-year projections are somewhat below where those updated projections are. So we feel, again, comfortable with where these revenues are, at least in the current round of re-projections from the state. Water and sewer charges, again, this one is hard to gauge. Just some statistics there. About 90% of our customers are residential or residential size meters. Those meter sizes, though, only provide about 40% of our system revenues. Those revenues we don't see a significant impact on, both now during, as we have just come through the shutdown and begin to emerge from that and businesses begin to reopen. We have seen a hit on those, and we have made some adjustments in things that we're doing within the operation right now to help respond to that. What that means, though, is that other 60% is provided by these big commercial and industrial users, and so we'll need to watch those billings and usages closely. Pay attention to what's going on with our industries as we just seek to make sure we can adjust to what really happens as we move through this fiscal year. But again, the recent billings, both in April and May, really reflect that. So not really a significant change in that residential size meter usage, but a heavier impact on the utilization and billings in the commercial industrial. So again, the actual impact of that, to put a dollar figure on it, is pretty difficult at this time because we don't know exactly where we'll be in terms of reopening and reestablishing, our local economy by then. And so we'll be watching closely. Again, we have made some adjustments already to spending, and as we move into the response section, you'll see that we're responding to those as well. Just as an interesting aside, the chart on the top of page 6, residences, industries, businesses have been getting serious about efficiency for years, and you can see that reflected in our both our water supply volume trend since 2005 and our wastewater treatment volume trend since 2005. Unfortunately, there isn't this one-to-one correlation between, less of a gallon provided doesn't necessarily correlate to a direct reduction in cost, because running a pump to provide 100 million gallon or 100 million cubic feet isn't that much less than running the pump all the time, all day long to provide 80 million cubic feet. So again, we're watching these funds very closely. Interest income is kind of the last one I want to talk about. This is less in terms of size of the revenue, but I just wanted to include it on here just to reflect that we are watching. These 4 funds have about $7 million in reserve funds that are invested in the city's investment portfolio. And so what that means, based on the pretty quick and significant action that the Fed has taken since the economic impacts started, that means if we lose 50 basis points or 0.5% in our average returns, that would cost us about $35,000 across these funds. If we lose 1% or 100 basis points, that would cost us about $70,000. So certainly that's going to have another impact on our revenues. Fund by fund, again, it's not hundreds of thousands or double-digit percentage-wise of total revenue, but it certainly is something to pay attention to, especially as we move into future budgets. On the bottom of page 6, it just summarizes what I just spent 15 minutes or so talking about as far as revenue losses on those 4 major categories. So we'll move now into kind of a time of talking about, that's the info, what's the plan? So anytime I think you start talking about financial responses and plans and what do we need to do, I think it's very critical to have a good understanding of what kind of condition do we enter this issue in. And I think the city enters this economic crisis or the impact of the pandemic on our local finances in very strong position. And I think what I can hope that that does for council as you talk to your constituents and think about it yourselves, is just to provide a level of comfort that even what we're going through, as bad as it is, does not put us in financial jeopardy. It doesn't put us in emergency mode and how do we remain solvent, but we are in very, very stable and strong financial position as we move through this crisis. And I think that's very, very important. So in these 4 funds, I just put the available reserves that we have in the funds and what that equates to in terms of total expenditures in the fund, and then what the benchmark is that we kind of use, at least in the general fund and the water and sewer fund. And you can see we're well within best practices and even exceeding best practices in the general fund in how our reserves are as we enter the crisis. So I'm not going to go through the intimate details of the what we plan to freeze. I want to draw your attention just to the summary on page 10 first, and then I'll just see if there's any questions related to the specific changes. So in summary, we have identified $658,600 in spending, and this is primarily capital projects and capital expenditures that were planned in the fiscal year 2021 budget initially, that we would recommend be frozen essentially until the impacts of the pandemic are I guess understood more as we see how we come through this financially. So that really is the kind of the crux of what we've done, and you can see the details of what that spending is, project by project and line item kind of by line item in the details section. One thing, we have not frozen anything that relates to public safety, and to be assured that none of these projects put any operation or service delivery in jeopardy. So we've been able to do that, I think, because of a stable budget, a budget that was structurally balanced as we entered this pandemic. We've been able to do this in a way that protects service delivery and doesn't risk any health or safety locally. So I think that's important to note as well. Just to wrap it up, I guess, as we talk about what we're recommending at this point related to a budget, we're recommending basically that council take action, and there's a resolution for you tonight to approve this pandemic financial response plan. So that would basically approve these spending freezes until such time that probably by our recommendation and your further action by resolution, they would be unfrozen if we get back to a point where we would be comfortable doing that. So subsequent to that, then we would recommend council adopt by ordinance then the General Appropriations Act ordinance as originally presented, but with the inclusion then of the downtown infrastructure project and all of the related appropriation measures that will take as well, and we'll talk about those next. So 2 actions. First would be to approve the plan, which would freeze these this spending that we presented here tonight, and then to adopt the budget ordinance. So running through, and this is on the last 2 pages of the plan, is just added as an addendum what it would look like to again, it was suggested really that our transparency could be improved, essentially related to the downtown infrastructure project by building the spending into the initial proposed budget. And so that's what we're proposing to do by the amendments to the ordinance as originally presented, listed for you on page 11 and 12. So what we need to do to get that in, the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund, again, this is where the taxes paid by the developer on the Lofts project will come into the Brownfield Fund as they're captured. And again, important to note is this includes state taxes, which it otherwise would not, will be captured, and those will be transferred out by an expenditure to a debt service fund that then will be used to pay for the debt service on the 2020 bond issue. And so we'll talk about that fund in just a second. We would also establish a new fund for the downtown infrastructure project, called the Downtown Infrastructure Project Fund. And again, this is a common practice that we do when we have a major capital project. We establish these capital project funds in the past. And so this would recognize the bond proceeds coming in, and then the construction expenditure to actually build that public infrastructure in the downtown area. On page 12, here's the debt service fund. So this would show money being transferred in from the major street fund and the local street fund, and the taxes coming in from the brownfield fund, all of which then will be used to pay back the principal and interest that will be required for the 2020 bonds. So again, as you recall, primarily the bonds are used in the major and local street fund to pay for construction of our normally scheduled projects. All of that has remained the same in the budget. And then with the addition of the outside funding source, essentially, of captured taxes that will be used to pay for the rest of the debt. Then we just budget in the major and local street fund for an additional transfer out to pay their portion of those of that debt service. So all of this in the major and local street fund was built into our long-term projections, and it makes sense. And we've talked about this with our bond financial advisor, and they're all on board, and we're comfortable with this. And so with these changes, then we would recommend that the council would approve, then adopt the General Appropriations Act ordinance. That's it. It's a lot of information.
I would say at this point, it'd probably be appropriate for council to then reopen, in a
The
sense,
public
the opportunity for.
I have to
for
open the public hearing.
Yep.
Yep, okay. So at this time, we will open the public hearing as it relates to, or excuse me, public comment as it relates to this public hearing. And if you would please state your name and address, and then keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Thank you.
I will comment if no one else will. My name is Bill Barnett, 915 Stimson Street, Cadillac, Michigan. Thank you for having this meeting. It was my understanding the meeting had nothing to do with the Cadillac law, so it's quite surprised to hear the discussion. I would ask the council to pass the budget with this issue not included in the budget, and you deal with this down the road. It's obvious a serious mistake was made here. Last fall, it was known that you no longer qualified for this money. It should have been done then. Should have had a college group in here in January or February, like the MEDC has recommended to other cities or villages that have qualified. We've known since 2016 we're not on that list. This is, it's been known, and if these requirements did change in the fall, we had plenty of time to get this done. Well before the pandemic. I'm not buying the city's excuse. It's not truthful. You had plenty of time to do this, and I would ask that you don't indebt the city another $1 million. And if you were even thinking of this, put it up for a public vote like the school millage. Make your case to the voters. This is not a good move by our city. It's not financially sound. We don't know what's coming around the corner, and you've already committed yourself to the $260,000. That should remain and be followed up with. But there's other sources that need to be tapped into here. The city's tapped out, and I would ask you to not pass this budget, or to do the right thing, work together, just simply take it out, pass your budget so the city doesn't have to be closed down because you're trying to jam through this issue that should have been dealt with last year. We shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be sitting in those chairs today. This has been messed up. for a bond, another million, another 150,000, which I'm assuming is contingency money. But you guys have milked this thing out and not told the public at first what was happening. No steps were taken to qualify. You haven't hired a college. You haven't spent the $11,000 it cost to do so. You've taken no steps to qualify for this loan. You folks dropped the ball. That's not on the taxpayers. That's on staff and city council. You folks need to look within yourself, make changes, fix this, and whatever you do, do not approve this bond in this budget. And please don't vote for this budget in this shape. Take it out. It's real easy. Pass the budget without the item included. And if you want me to speak more, I will. I appreciate you giving me time. If no one else is going to talk, I'd be happy to say more.
Thank you. Not hearing anyone else, we'll go ahead and close public comment and move to the discussion of the council.
I have one question, if I may.
No, you may not.
I'm just
Now we'll move to discussion of the council, please.
Well, if nobody's going to talk, I always do. So let me ask you two questions, Marcus.
Yes, sir.
The current bond, that's 2.3 million. That's the only bond we have out for the city. Is that it?
Believe so, yep.
2.3 million, wasn't originally 3.2.
That's the amount that's left outstanding.
Right, left outstanding, 2.3 million. One quick question, yes or no, and I can put this to sleep. Was any of that bond used on the market to build, transferred over and spent on building of the market?
No, it was used for the plaza.
What's that?
It was used for the plaza.
The plaza?
Yep, not the market.
Okay, the plaza meaning the water park? Or,
That whole area, yep.
okay,
Yep, the public infrastructure.
The parking and all that.
so that, okay, that was shifted over there, okay,
The parking, the fireplace, the whole
okay.
area, yep.
Okay, very good. That answers that. One last thing, and I'd have to agree with Mr. Barnett, which I don't always do, but we did seem to drop the ball on this low moderate income list. But that's after the fact. There's nothing we can do now. If we did know last fall that it was due, we need to expedite that and get that done. But it's a moot point right now, so that's it.
Marcus, can you address that statement?
So the
Yes.
it's sort of a bittersweet scenario.
Yeah, I should have asked you
Yeah.
to step in and speak
Yeah,
up.
no, it's a bittersweet scenario. Communities typically don't want to be on the low to moderate income list. Communities that are on that list are communities that typically would be struggling, and that's why they become eligible for, in a sense, special funding opportunities through a federal grant program, namely the Community Development Block Grant Program. There are a lot of communities that find themselves, like Cadillac, that are off the list, but are not off the list by a lot. We're just off the list. And because we've improved over time, that's a thing to celebrate. That's a good thing that we made we got to a point where, we got off this list. That being said, we're still a community that could greatly benefit by having access to this source of federal funds and grants and whatnot to help us with our economic development projects that we're undertaking. This one, for instance, that we've been talking about as it relates to our budget. Also, other public infrastructure that we have that we'd like to try to fund. Having this as a potential source would be great. Because we're just off the list, in working with the specific office under the MEDC that manages this federal program, the general sort of rule of thumb is that if you're just off the list within, I want to say about 5%, they say, sure, go ahead. You got to use a certified, institution to conduct a scientifically significant random survey, get yourself recertified onto the list, so that you can apply to get some of these dollars, all for the objective of getting yourself back off the list. So, it's sort of funny when you think about it, the chasing your tail, you're off the list, which is a good thing, but yet you really want to get back on the list to get more dollars. And then when you get the dollars, you invest them in your community, and then the result of that is going to end up getting you back off the list again. So, it's sort of a funny thing where you look at that. So when we got the first community development block grant, about a year or so ago, we knew we were not on the list. However, at that time, we did not need to be on the list to get the grant. They being the CDBG office, was able to attribute various portions of the project as meeting the national objective to be able to get the money, and we got nearly $750,000 of grant funds for the first part of the project. When we started down the road again to try to get ourselves in the queue for a second grant, it was at that point, which was last fall, that we were informed, hey guys, rules have changed. You got to be on that list, and in order to get on that list, here's what you have to do. We then immediately started going down the path of finding institutions that would be able to do the work, that were certified in the state of Michigan to do the work. We have a tremendous amount of time spent over the winter, tail end of the fall, into the winter, getting our data ready. We actually had the city council, the last meeting of December 2019, approved an amendment to our budget with a new appropriation to fund getting that study done. And then the pandemic hit as we move into the spring. We still didn't have all the data ready to actually get somebody on board, which is why we didn't come to council to have an approval made, but we were about to, and then everything closed down. And with everything closed down, we find ourselves in the position where we are now, where, okay, while the plan A was trying to get another grant, that's still part of what we're looking at doing for what is going to be left of public infrastructure related improvements to do after the second building is built, or as a part of the second building being built, I should say. But as we are sitting here today, right now, the timing is such that we have to be able to move forward with essentially the first phase of that project, of our public infrastructure related improvements. And the only other available source to do so, to use in a timely enough fashion where we're able to actually get our money back, is through the brownfield incentive, which is what all the other clarifications were about, is again as it relates to our pending Appropriations Act ordinance. So, Brian, great question. I know that's out there circulating.
It's out there and everybody's talking about it.
Thank you for
So I hope
clarifying.
that was.
Thanks for Owen, you did a great job on that, your little presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing all that work. That really puts, I think, all of our minds at ease. And I'd also like to commend you especially, but the city also. Years of very conservative budgeting is what's put us in this position. And that's why when something like this happens, I feel I have so much trust in you because of your, you've proven yourself to be a very conservative budgeter, and that's why we're where we are. So thank you.
Takes a whole team, that's for sure.
Yep.
I'd like to thank Owen. Also, I know this has been a lot of work. I feel much more comfortable in the people that I've talked to out in the public being able to see the actions that we're actually taking and freezing some of the spending to show that we're prepared not to affect essential services. However, we're not afraid to hold off on things in a fiscally responsible manner, knowing that we can take action if it turns out either we need to or the conditions change, in being able to show the public in your document exactly what we're doing. The other thing, which I know, and there was the comment on it, adding the $1 million into the budget, I think, was absolutely the right thing to do, so people see the transparency of the spending on the project, and therefore are able to ask the educated questions of us and staff to get the answers so that we know how we're doing it. So I appreciate that also.
So just as a procedural reminder, if I may, Mayor, members of the City Council. So at this point, what we're requesting is support of a resolution that approves the city's COVID-19 financial response plan as amended. We think that from a sort of procedural basis, having that in place first would make sense, as then the next step would be support of a resolution that would adopt the Appropriations Act as amended as well.
So I'll make a motion to approve the resolution to approve the Cadillac COVID-19 pandemic financial response plan.
I'll second it.
Councilmember King,
Yes.
Shippers,
Yes?
Ellenboss,
Yes.
Ingalls,
Yes.
Mayor Folkins.
Yes, motion carries.
And I would also like to make a motion to approve the resolution to adopt the ordinance establishing General Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2021 as amended.
Support. This is Councilmember Ingalls.
Sorry, I should have said that was Shippers.
Councilmember Shippers,
Yes?
Ingalls,
Yes.
Ingalls,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Ellenboss,
No.
Mayor Folkins.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. The next thing on our agenda this evening, we do have a communication that we need to talk about, and I believe Marcus is going to present that.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mayor and members of the City Council. Really appreciate the quickness of being able to get back together and all of your patience throughout the process. And looking forward to hopefully, seeing great new beginnings if hopefully the pandemic passes and onward and forward. So the Cadillac Area Public Schools is going to be hosting a graduation parade this coming Sunday. They are doing it basically starting at Kenwood School, going down Chestnut Street, and then terminating at the library. The parade is going to be very similar to what other schools across the state and other states as well have been doing, where basically the high school seniors will be riding in a processional, and people can socially distance and wave to them as they go by. The procession would start sometime between 4 to 5 p.m. on Sunday, May 31st. And the request in your packet shows in the graphical representation the location that we're looking at doing the street shutdowns. And so the request this afternoon is to approve the Cadillac CAPS 2020 graduation parade and authorize staff to make the necessary road closures to accommodate the event. As well as signage that may go up directing people as to where they're going to be going.
I'd make a motion to approve the May 31st, 2020 senior car cruise related street closures signage acknowledging the 2020 graduates as presented.
Support. Councilmember King.
Councilmember Ellenboss,
Oh, you betcha we'll be there, yes.
Ingalls,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Shippers,
Yes.
Mayor Folkins.
Yes, motion carries, and with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Are we meeting on Monday?
Yes, it'll be a short one.